Welcome to the 97th episode of the Hail Married podcast. I'm A. Toves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're back to talk UTSA basketball. Let's get started. Let's start off by talking about the best UTSA team that you're probably not watching but should be, the women's basketball team.
I don't think there's a lot of people watching. They should be watching. You're right, because currently 7-1 on a 7-game winning streak. It's the second best start in school history. I mean, there's a lot of good things to take in just in those first two statements right there.
Yeah, I mean, they're off to their best start since I think 2013. It's really great to see what they've been able to accomplish these last couple of years under Karen Aston.
We're coming off of the fact that, we won both games in Puerto Rico on that Thanksgiving tournament, beat a pretty good UNC Greensboro team, and then beat I would say, underwomaned Towson team. You're starting to see kind of the same script reveal itself with the women's team. And then they get Sam Houston at home, and they just absolutely destroy Sam Houston, 79-36. Just one of their better shooting games at 47.8. It's certainly looking like this team is going to make quite the noise in the AAC. And yet, we talked about that they were predicted to be fifth, but I think we'll see how the season goes, but you certainly see that this team can achieve much more than fifth.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, I know we're not in conference play at the time, but right now we're sitting atop the standings just based on our out-of-conference schedule. So, they definitely have the momentum. And I think the thing that's really different this season is they have the focus. And that's the thing that Coach Aston's talked a lot about in some of her interviews. Just trying to get to a point where you have that consistent focus, because it's a long season. You want to get to the NCAA tournament. You want to get to the goal of, winning over 20 games, and you just have to be consistent day in and day out. And that's something that I think she's felt like, because we've been a younger team over the past couple of years, it's been harder to do every season, but you can just see it really coming out this season, because going into that Sam Houston game, in an interview, she had mentioned that they didn't really have a great practice coming off of Puerto Rico. And she was kind of a little concerned about how the team was going to handle that. And yet they came into that Sam Houston game. They just absolutely dominated, shut down Sam Houston. And, obviously the fact that they had some bad practices didn't translate to how they played at game time. And that was, just another sign of their maturity throughout the last couple of years.
Right. One of the things I think to really look at there, too, is the fact that you're talking about coming off Thanksgiving, and then the next week right after that is the last week of the semester.
Right.
And then right after that is finals week, right? So you could understand there's going to be a little bit of distraction for the players, as they kind of finish up their semester. But you're right. I mean, maybe that led to the bad practices, but going back to what you said, it did not lead to us having a poor performance on the court against Sam Houston. And, looking over the overall stats in the first 8 games of the season, you're seeing a UTSA team that's improved their overall shooting, their free throw percentage, and their scoring. Obviously, your scoring is going to get better if you're shooting better,
right?
Theoretically. They're slightly up on their 3-point percentage from last season. And, overall shooting 42%. And I think I wanted to go back and highlight that. And the reason is because the last couple seasons under Coach Aston, they've been in the high 30s. So I think there's a reason for that. And a lot of that comes from defense. Defensively, they're allowing opponents to shoot a little bit better on them in terms of, just overall shooting, 3-point percentage. Free throw is right there. I mean, there's nothing you can do about free throw. Just don't put other opponents on the line, right? But they've got now a differential of they're scoring 69 points a game, and now they're holding their opponents to 53.8. So why that big difference with increased or better shooting from opponents, right? Well, it's because they're holding their opponents to lower scoring because of the fact that they have a +5 increase in turnovers forced per game. That right there is not something you had seen previously from UTSA. They
Hmm.
have some good players, but they weren't creating as much chaos on defense, and now
Right.
they're creating that chaos. We saw it firsthand when we watched the A&M Corpus Christi game, and they just completely smothered A&M Corpus Christi. And we had talked about it in the last podcast, I think around the Army preview, but they continue to do that, and you're again, as I said, you're starting to see certain stories kind of play out about what this team is about, and it's that. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't areas to improve on, right? And of
Right.
course, you kind of have made the comment to me before that it's like, yes, they are playing better, but Coach Aston now, in terms of what you just said before, in terms of their maturity, she's starting to kind of nitpick a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the last couple of things she said in interviews is that they really needed to improve on their 3-point percentage defense. And then offensively, she didn't feel like they were rebounding as well as she'd like. And it's interesting because we've seen improvements in both of these areas. So, like you mentioned, it just kind of shows that instead of her having to address big glaring issues now, she's really able to focus in and like, okay, this is good, but it's not great. And we need to improve this in non-conference so that when we get to the AAC play, where we have some tough opponents coming, that will be really buttoned down in these areas.
Yeah, and from the UTRGV game, the second game of the season, we were there for that game, and we saw UTRGV team come in and hit a lot of big time threes, and you saw like a lot of the opponents hitting these shots, but they were still well defended. So that's gonna happen. Like,
Right.
you can play the best defense in the world, and sometimes people are just gonna make tough shots. Now, if you can consistently do that, and that I think is what the women have been much more successful so far than the men have in terms of forcing tough shots to be taken by their opponents, you're seeing the success. And I'll also say this is that you're talking about how Coach Aston mentioned the offensive rebound. Well, they're probably not also rebounding as well because we talked about they're shooting better. So
Right.
you're not going to get as many opportunities to go chase down a rebound or anything like that. So it's a double-edged sword. But again, to your point, yes, there is a little nitpicking, but you still want them to continue to really nail some of these things down as they start building towards conference play, because that again is that's where you get the chance to go to the NCAA tournament, and that's where you get the chance to make some noise when you finally get to the conference tournament. And that's really what's, I would say, the big milestones still way down the line, but
Hmm.
you got to start building that momentum now.
Yeah. In terms of roster changes, UTSA announced that Sienna Gudidaro is no longer with the team this semester for some personal reasons. She does plan to rejoin the team next year. That's now 2 guards that we've lost from the team this season for, different personal reasons. And that's really hurting our depth at that position going forward.
Yeah, and when we talk about the depth, I mean, you're talking about the fact that now you start going down to having Damara Allen and Mia Hammonds come in a little bit sooner
Hmm.
and having to make more of an impact. Now you'll get some time with them prior to conference play, but again, they're both true freshmen.
Yeah, it's always a tough ask for young, teammates to come in
Right.
and have to have that big contributing role.
Right.
We'll also be looking for, Emma Lucio to have, an impact this season, as well as Alexis Parker to play a much bigger role than she's been playing in the past.
Yeah, and I think that with Alexis, the biggest thing I've always seen with her is the fact that confidence. Like, she just seems. I know that she can do it. We've seen her create some defensive chaos. We've seen her, kind of beginning to really sharpen up that offensive game, but we haven't really seen her consistently do it, and definitely not really put it together on both ends in a game. But it's starting to get there, and now with the chance to get more minutes, I mean, the coaching staff is going to be looking at her. I mean, this is her 3rd season, so I would imagine she knows exactly what to expect from Jamie Carey and Karen Aston. Like, they're going to make sure they put her in a position to succeed, but she's going to have to take that opportunity by the horns and really do something with it. I think I think she'll share some time at first with Emma Lucio, and I think
Okay.
Emma Lucio is probably going to be. I don't know. I've always told you she strikes me very much as a Manu Ginobili esque player
Right.
because she whips some passes sometimes, and I always said that about Kira White. She was, she'd always like whip some passes and it'd be like, ooh, I don't know if that was the right pass to make, but
Right.
she as she matured, things got a little bit better. And with Emma, again, I think she's got some talented players that's not really going to happen. But I think where she's really going to make the impact is 3-point shooting because this team does struggle. We kind of talked about already in terms of the stats. They do kind of struggle with 3-point shooting. They're really not the most consistent 3-point shooting
Right.
team. But if Emma can come in, stretch the defense a little bit, I think this team is going to have an opportunity to continue to grow. But it's going to be, I think, Alexis and Emma that are going to be big, as you mentioned. So next up for them is actually going to be Monday on the road at Stanford. Yes, that's right, Stanford. 2
Yeah.
p.m. Central on ACC Extra. Stanford is currently 7-3. They're currently on a 2-game losing streak. They lost to number 5 LSU in overtime. That was a tough one because I was watching that game from time to time, and Stanford was pummeling LSU, and then LSU just chipped away at the lead and finally just overtook a Stanford team. And then Stanford plays Cal.
Yeah, and they lost to Cal by 20 points. I think it was 83 to 63. And there was a little bit of time between the LSU game and the Cal game, and it almost just seemed like maybe they were feeling defeated, kind of going into that game. So it may be a good time for UTSA just to catch them at that right moment.
Right.
They're a very talented team, but last season they had the number 2 draft pick in the WNBA. They had their longtime coach who left. And so now, you have kind of some changes. You are, kind of on a downward spiral with your momentum after, losing a heartbreaker to LSU, getting frustrated with Cal. Maybe this will be the right opportunity for UTSA to come in and just catch them at the right moment.
I think in years past, we would have probably looked at this game and just said, it'd be nice to be competitive. I think you look at this game, and I'm not going to say that you're looking at like putting away a Stanford team and completely shutting them down, but I think you want to see progress from our team by at least shutting them down for a quarter or
Mm-hmm.
like really causing Stanford problems on their offensive end. Just by making sure you can, extend your defense, maybe press a little bit, maybe, force some turnovers to get some easy baskets. Obviously, Stanford's probably going to try to or anticipate some of that, but you just never know. Like you said,
Yeah.
they might still be licking their wounds. Maybe that loss to LSU continues a slide, and we were able to catch them on that downward spiral. But after that, Thursday at home in the Convo against UT Arlington at 4 p.m. Yeah, that's right, 4 p.m. It's an early game. It's kind of weird. I was mentioning to you, I don't know how this team will react either,
Yeah.
because of the fact that you're playing at 2 o'clock, pretty much kind of the middle of the day there on the West Coast, and then you come home and you're gonna play like early, like 4 p.m. Like
Yeah.
normally your games are around 6:30, more of evening to night games, and here you are now having to adjust and play during the week at these weird times. Whereas you're used to playing like at 4 o'clock or 2 o'clock on a Saturday or something,
Right.
like that is not as big of a deal, or at least they kind of get used to that eventually. But um, I'm hoping that doesn't disrupt our Roadrunners. And then Saturday on the road against Texas State at noon. It's certainly a team that Karen Aston has struggled with.
Yeah, I mean, it's a rivalry game. You never know what's going to happen. Texas State this year, it's a little deceiving if you look at their record because they have a good record. I think they're 6-3, but some of those wins have come against teams that are not as competitive. They've played North Texas or UNT Dallas. They played Tarleton. Um, and Tarleton's struggling this year. It's their second year with their new coach. They're still kind of trying to feel things out themselves. So, you can't just judge them Texas State based on their record. But I would love to see us come away with a win in this game. But you just never know with rivalry games. Records don't seem to matter as much.
Yeah, yeah. And you said that so many times, and I'm like, well, let's hope that that's still a possibility that we just throw the rivalry out of out the window and we just take care of business. And I think they can. This is, like I said, a very talented team. So only other thing that we want to mention before we move on is just Nia Goni. Sounds like she's got an undisclosed injury. Did not play against Sam Houston, so hopefully she's able to play against Stanford. But there were some concerns about how many players they were going to have available against Stanford. So there might be other injuries that we just don't know about yet. Right. Again, much like Coach Traylor, I'm not going to say who it is. We don't know either. So we'll keep an eye out, though, because, I think the more that more players we lose, the tougher it is to continue to kind of play, as we saw with the men's team. Speaking of the men's team, currently 5-5 on a 3-game winning streak. We're recording this after the trip to North Dakota, where they beat North Dakota, and we'll kind of rewind here a little bit. They split their games in that Troy. They're at Troy in that kind of odd little turkey shootout or whatever it was. They did lose to Troy, but they beat Merrimack on dramatic fashion. They kind of came back and just got hot at the right moment, and Merrimack just could not handle what UTSA had to give them. And then he came in and played Houston Christian at home. That was a weird game.
Yeah.
And it just felt like we didn't know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the game got a lot closer than it probably should have, but the team did seem a little bit out of sorts in that game. And, I think part of it's just been having to work through their lineup. They've had a lot of injuries. This was still one of the games where Scuda Joseph was not available due to compliance issues. So it just kind of seemed like they were kind of trying out different lineups, different guys, and really just trying to figure out what was going to be, the best group of guys to have on the court at any given time.
And I felt like they were kind of forcing Primo to just do something, right? Yeah. Like it was like,
take the team on your shoulders.
Come on, Primo, like just figure it out. And they eventually kind of started settling in a little bit more. Mm-hmm. I have found, as we start kind of going through more of these, some of these other games, Demario Monsanto, I think, is much more valuable than I thought he was going to be. And that's not a hit. I'm just simply saying that as I watch them play, it's Damari's length. Mm-hmm. It's his defense, and then his timely three-point shooting. I would have never guessed that was going to be sort of a key part of this team. And he's a good three-point shooter, and you see how that kind of stretches the opposing defenses. Let's get to the St. Mary's game, because that St. Mary's game was against a very good St. Mary's team, I should really say. I mean, they were rated 34 in KenPom rating, so we lose in overtime 82-74.
Yeah, but if you just look at that score, what you miss from that is the fact that we were down by 23 points midway through the first half. And for the team to overcome such a gigantic deficit and battle their way back to be able to force overtime against such a good team is just, it just really shows how much progress this team has made this season, and how much momentum they have as each and every game goes. They're kind of gaining momentum. They're getting to, a better place where they're feeling more confident, and you're hoping to see that kind of continue as we get closer and closer to conference play.
And let's back up a second, because they didn't really force overtime. It was St. Mary's that had to come back and force overtime on UTSA. That still is mind-blowing to tell you that, because had this been in the previous 2 or 3 seasons, we would have never seen that. We would have been down 23. Everybody would have, from UTSA, would have shut down, their TVs. And the reason I say this is because I came in watching it, and I was editing one of our previous episodes. And so, I turned it on and I started watching the game. I was like, this is not what I expected, right?
Right.
This is not, can't believe this is happening. But yeah, we lose the game. I think from a UTSA fan perspective, what you said, I think, epitomizes it. There's growth. There's a little bit of momentum. We get to Arkansas, and then last Saturday, they lose 75-60, but at halftime, UTSA is winning.
Right.
Again, both of these are on the road. These are not games that we would have been necessarily competitive in the last couple of seasons. And I think, again, that shows just what the promise could be from, Coach Clonch and his team, because, I would never have guessed that we would have taken the lead on Arkansas. Arkansas ranked 40th in Ken Palm. So,
Yeah.
again, you're seeing, sure, two top 40 teams in Ken Palm that UTSA goes on the road to play and does go toe to toe with them for a long while, and especially against St. Mary's, almost pulls off the upset.
Yeah, I think the thing that you kind of have to call out here is if you're looking at this team and you're comparing it to maybe the last two teams where, we were also in a rebuilding, and you look at just the record at this point, you might feel like, well, this team isn't good enough, or if we're just at this point, maybe we're not going to get where we want to get, at the end of the
Right.
season. But the difference is the level of competition that Coach Clonch has scheduled this season is much higher than the level of competition that we've played in our out of conference schedule the last couple of years. So it's really hard to kind of compare apples to apples. So if you're just looking at the record, it's a little bit deceiving.
Right.
You just kind of have to keep that in mind. Like you mentioned, the Ken Palm ratings for St. Mary's and Arkansas are much higher than probably any of the teams that we played last year in out of conference.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because since you know me, I went back and I looked at the numbers, and yes, they were. If you do the average of all of the out of conference games from last season and this season, last season was like the mid 200s. This season, it's in the 190s. So you see that there's almost, and I might be fudging the numbers a little bit more there, but it's almost a 50 place rating that between both last year to this year. So yeah, I mean, it's certainly a building block and an opportunity to kind of figure out who you are. And I think that's what you have to do, especially for UTSA. They're always going to have to go on the road and figure out who they are, because that's the only way they're going to be able to build something moving forward. And you get North Dakota coming in this past Friday. It win 80-76. It was as close as you think it was, because North Dakota, I thought, again, they shot better than I thought they would from the 3-point line. And they took advantage of that UTSA defense, but they did also really struggle against the 2-2-1 press that Coach Clonch finally was able to really unveil, because of the fact that Scuda was now in the lineup. This is
Right.
Scuda's second game back, and back with UTSA now, and I say back, but really with UTSA. And you get to see more of a changing defense, whereas before Coach Clonch had to limit what defenses he could play, because he just had a limited bench, and he couldn't, he really couldn't afford to get too many fouls from his
Right.
players. I thought it was a well-fought game there in the convo. I think there were kind of the same thing you see with the women at times. You go through some droughts, and the defense is sometimes not really there. So then it seems like we get a little lackadaisical. But whereas with the women, you see them kind of turn on this switch and then really smother an opponent. That's where this men's team is still growing and
Right.
kind of beginning to do. And against North Dakota on Sunday, they go up there and they seem to be smothering North Dakota for the longest time. Now, again, they start coming back and hitting some shots. But in both games, North Dakota just did not shoot well from the free throw line. And really, that has to be the difference of the game,
It
because
did.
they weren't able to take advantage of really easy opportunity to score.
Yeah, and especially in the game on Friday. I mean, that last 4 minutes, we were just continuing to foul them. And if they had hit, 50% more of those shots, they would have won the game. It really was the difference
you're
in the
right.
game.
I think the other thing was that when they were up in North Dakota, we were listening on the radio, and Uncle Andy was like, every single foul is always on the Roadrunners. It's not North Dakota. And that's what it felt like on Friday too. It felt
Right.
like somehow North Dakota was continuing to get or draw fouls, and that's certainly an area where Coach Clonch is probably going to have to figure out how do we draw some more fouls. Because if you go and start looking at the stats through the first 10 games, you see a UTSA team that's shooting 41.7% from the field, 33.9% from 3-point range, but the free throw percentage, Atos, 83.4%.
Yeah, that's huge.
It is because they're battling Wisconsin for the best free throw shooting team in the nation. Let me say that again. The UTSA men's team is battling Wisconsin for the number one spot as the best free throw shooting team in the nation. If we're able to take advantage of those free opportunities, I mean, I'm just telling you, like it changes how I think AAC teams are going to play UTSA in the future.
Right.
Because they're going to try not to, like, obviously, they don't want to put UTSA on the line because that means that UTSA is going to just extend their leads. They're going to come back. They're going to draw more fouls. It's something that they continue to watch, but I think this team certainly has something to build on, and not something that I think I would have told you, 10 games into the season. Hey, what's the craziest stat that you'll find out that we're that good at free throws?
Yeah, absolutely. And, this game today was the first time that we had a leading scorer other than Primo Spears. Scudo was our leading scorer. So, we're starting to see that we're not, again, having to just put everything on Primo's shoulders. And we're starting to see, the team really take shape. We had 5 guys in double figures today. So, and I think, again, that you combine that with the great shooting percentage, free throw shooting percentage, you can definitely see where this team can take or where they can go in the future.
I'm really encouraged by Janivia Smith. I think he just goes by John Smith. Mostly because at the beginning of the year when I saw him play, I was like, he's that rangy, lanky forward that is going to give you some good shot blocking on defense, but he can run the floor. And it's not like he's getting like easy like dunks running the floor or
Right.
anything, but to me, he changes how you can play some different defensive looks, and that I think is what I'm really encouraged about. And he seems to be getting he's coming off the bench, but he's getting to see a lot of the crunch time minutes, and hopefully he continues to play that way because I think he's done a great job inside over the last few games, and he continues to do that. We're gonna be at least a tough out in the AAC.
Yeah, definitely. One other roster change just to note, UTSA forward Jaquan Scott did not play in the last game against North Dakota, or in the last 2 games against North Dakota. He wasn't even in the arena on Friday. When Coach Clonch was asked about his status, he said he's not with us right now. So he elaborated that it was a personal matter, but it doesn't seem like there's any kind of timetable for his return. So, we'll definitely need to see these other guys that have been playing well, continue to do so and step up.
Yeah, and honestly, as long as we stay healthy, I think this team has some different pieces that are going to be fun to watch, and that's not something that we really said a lot of over the last few seasons.
Sure.
And I'm not trying to hit here and Coach Henson or anything. He did best he could to try to find players for UTSA, but I think you see this UTSA team really kind of gearing up, and really what I feel is a little more of a down year within the AAC. So I'm not saying that UTSA is going to like all of a sudden be, number 6, or like jump up like completely up in the standings. But I think we'll see some closer games and that kind of sliver of hope that we've been waiting to see over the last few seasons. Next up, they play Southwestern Adventist at home on Thursday at noon. Again, one of those, once I was talking about the women, one of those kind of
weird day games. Yeah.
middle of the day game, weekday games. And then on the road against Army on December 29th at 2 p.m. Look, the Southwestern Adventist game it's a lower school. I think it's like NAIA or something like that, or Division II. It's not really a game that you would imagine is going to be very close, but at least gives them a chance to kind of gear up as they head towards conference. And then Army, December 29th, I would say the thing with Army is that they're not a very good team. last year they came into the Convo and they did beat UTSA. However, like you said earlier, this is a different UTSA team. So
Right.
I think, this Army team is got a rating, I think, of like 340 or something like that within Ken Palm. And North Dakota was like 302. So I'm not expecting necessarily, I'm not going to say that we would definitely beat them, but I think, it would be great to go on the road and take care of business there.
Yeah, I mean, so far we have one road win, which was today against North Dakota. So for us to get another road win, I think would be, a huge confidence builder going into conference.
Yeah.
Before we go, let's talk a little bit about the Independence Bowl drama that popped up this week. Unexpectedly, Marshall opted out of the Independence Bowl against Army and kind of created some chaos and some drama for a little while. It wasn't completely unexpected that Marshall opted out, given the fact that, Coach Huff resigned immediately after their Sun Belt championship game. You expected to see, a lot of guys kind of jump into the portal, but I think they said they had close to 28 guys in the last week or two. And while they had been telling the Independence Bowl officials, yeah, we're still going to play and we're committed, it clearly became obvious that that was not going to be possible.
It's interesting because it's really sparked the debate as to should there be penalties at schools if they opt out. And first of all, we predicted the fact that Coach Huff was probably going to throw the double birds
Right.
at Marshall as he won the Sun Belt and then got out of town. Hilarious that he's staying within the Sun Belt and going to Southern Miss. But I'm there has to be some penalties, I think, to schools, especially if, like you said, they kept telling Independence Bowl officials that they were going to play.
Right.
I get you're going to have, these guys opt out. And I don't think there's ever going to be a perfect date as to when, the transfer portal opens. There's just not. You're just going to have to set something, and then there's going to have to be some sort of rules that state you assured us of this. Now all of a sudden you're backing out and we have to scramble.
Right. Because they're so close to the date of the bowl. I think they're within 2 weeks, which still, it seems like that's a lot of time. But when you think about the fact that finals have just ended, kids are graduating, now you're going through and you're having to look at all of these 5 and 7 schools and go through them by their APR rating. And, a lot of these kids have gone home. Coaches are, out recruiting, or, maybe they've gone on vacation. Kids are who knows where, right? It's a lot harder for them to come up with a team to play. And I think they had to go through something like 15 schools, I read, to get to Louisiana Tech. And once they got to Louisiana Tech, they said, absolutely, we will be willing to play. We'll make it happen. Fortunately for Louisiana Tech, the Independence Bowl is in Shreveport. It's very close to campus.
Right.
So it probably was a lot easier for them to, kind of round up the troops, get them back on campus, because, now we've got to practice and we've got to prepare for Army. And that's the other piece. Some of these other schools, they might have been able to get their kids together, but they're probably looking at it saying, and now you want me to throw together, a team that's going to be ready to play the triple option, which we haven't faced all season.
Right.
And maybe have never faced, depending on what school you're talking about, So, they were really lucky that Louisiana Tech, was able to do that. It was kind of interesting because Louisiana Monroe, I guess, was a little bit lower than Louisiana Tech.
Oh,
and
God.
they issued a statement, saying, well, they had wanted to play, but, unfortunately, they weren't, they didn't get down to that level to ask Louisiana Monroe. But, it's good that they had at least 2 options, right?
The fact that Louisiana Monroe went out and put out a statement, well, tell me the most useless thing you can do. Oh yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say we were ready, but we just weren't there. Well, who cares? Like, nobody picked you. Forget it.
Yeah, they didn't
Like,
get to you.
Nobody was gonna get to you anyway. So anyway,
I mean, yeah, like I said, Louisiana Tech, it was interesting because they weren't one of the schools that was on the bubble to get to 6-6.
No.
Like, they had to win 2 of their last 3 games to get to 5-7. So, They're on an upswing, I guess, but this is going to be a tall order for Sonny Cumby to get his team on campus, get them ready to face Army.
Look,
This,
the fact that Louisiana Tech, like before the end of the season, had to put out a message of support for Sonny Cumby and be like, yeah, he'll be returning next season, to all of a sudden getting them to a bowl, you just kind of just gave him ammunition to say, well, what are you talking about? I got us to a bowl. Like,
yeah,
everything's great. No, it's really not great. And, anyway.
but yeah, it'll be an interesting game to keep an eye on when we get there. So
Yeah, I went all in on Army to win that game in my
yeah,
bowl pickup.
especially since obviously did not turn out the way that they wanted against Navy this week. Again, rivalry game. You never know what's going to happen. So they're going to be coming into the Independence Bowl, I think, wanting to end on a high note.
Or something, yeah. All right, let's get to the AAC coaching updates. We'll start with Tulsa because I have to come out and say immediately. Last time I said I thought Tulsa was a good job, but it turns out I was way wrong. Find out after Kevin Wilson is dismissed that they don't really have any NIL money or very, very little. As many outgoing players were stating that they just didn't receive any of the promised NIL funds that they should have been getting. And that tells you right there, just as much as we complain, and I say we, but I really mean Coach Traylor complains about NIL. Coach Traylor, you've got at least three NIL collectives set up for you. Tulsa over here is promising stuff that they can't even deliver.
Right.
So in terms of NIL, UTSA is fine. Obviously, there can always be more, but that's a whole different discussion for another time. Anyway, the fact that Kevin Wilson, was dismissed, I'm sure it was just a sigh of relief, like at this point, because he's like, I don't know what I was going to do. Like, I mean, how are you? I don't know that he was promising the money, but, he pretty much said there wasn't any money. All right, well, that tells you that going into the portal and chasing that NIL money isn't always what it should be. And
Right.
I think that we know that, but I think it can be fair from this Tulsa issue. It can be restated one more time. They do end up hiring Trey Lamb, former East Tennessee State head coach. He's from the FCS level. He's been at the FCS level for a while, kind of brought up Gardner Webb and brought them to the FCS playoffs, I think, a couple seasons ago. He then went one season to East Tennessee State, made them a respectable, and took off after 1 year after he was just about to sign an extension, or I think he did sign an extension. It's still kind of murky as to what happened there.
Yeah, the timing.
That's a crazy story in itself. I won't get into it right now, but read up a little bit on Trey Lamb and East Tennessee State because it seemed like he left on a very salty note. Though I think the athletic director has a point that he just kind of left a lot of coaches in a lurch at the last minute because he left for Tulsa. One kind of interesting hire, I think, from that, is Joe Selfo, his offensive coordinator at East Tennessee State. He's the nephew of I would say a long ago former UTSA offensive coordinator Frank Selfo, the first 2 years of Frank Wilson's tenure. So nice to see another Selfo and,
Yep.
getting close to UTSA. Overall, I think Trey Lamb's going to be, I think it's a decent hire. I think based on the fact that Tulsa doesn't seem to have I would say, the type of, I guess, money and, any sort of support for the program as they probably should as FBS school. I think going down FCS to get somebody works perfectly. Now, Charlotte, Biff, where are you now?
They hired a guy that likes to wear sleeves. That's all you need to know.
Yep. And another kind of interesting tie back to like Marshall and Charles Huff, Tim Albin from Ohio University wins the MAC. And then what does he do? He goes, later, Ohio, I am going to Charlotte.
Yep.
I think it's a solid hire. I think he fits with what Charlotte is working with. The MAC schools just really don't have a lot. They're pretty much like the bottom of the G5 barrel, or second to last, right before Conference USA. And to get, I think, a solid head coach, let's see what he can do. But I mean, he's had to probably work with and
Limited
do a
resources.
lot. Do a lot with less. Something we've heard about here from UTSA. I think that's probably gonna be a really good hire. So We'll see how these guys do. I don't expect a ton of success from them right away, but if they can build up those teams, and I think Trey Lamb has made some nice comments about what they need to do at Tulsa. It continues to strengthen the AAC.
Absolutely. And then just a couple of notes from the UTSA transfer portal. We heard trailers say earlier that there would be a number of backups that would be hitting the portal this year, that he was committed to, helping these kids who have, been a backup for UTSA, have been that needed depth for us, find a place where they could get more playing time. And this is one of those storylines where, this is what the portal is meant to do, is to help these kids that aren't getting a lot of playing time have an opportunity to find a different landing spot so that they can showcase their talents. And so, you're going to see some more names kind of jump into the portal, I would expect, after the bowl game. Certainly there could always be somebody that we're surprised by that's a starter, but for the most part, the kids that have gotten into the portal are, the ones who have either seen diminished backup or diminished playing time this season, or have been that kind of consistent backup. So we've seen Chase Allen, Kavorian Barnes, Walker Beatty, Jackson Gilkey, Eddie Lee Marburger, and Jace Wilson, join the transfer portal. Certainly hope that these kids find the right landing spot for them.
And real quick, just like you said, this is also the part where when you see some guys jump in the portal, they wanted that playing time, but you also need to kind of free up scholarships, right? And this is where you see coaching staff pretty much being honest with players and saying, you're not going to get it. So let's move on from each other. So it'll be interesting to see if anybody else goes in there, but I wouldn't take it as a hit if, unless it's like a big name, but I would seriously doubt it would be.
Yeah. I mean, so far the only surprise has been Ron Triplett.
Yeah.
We'll have more in our next episode about the Myrtle Beach Bowl, but so far we haven't heard of any non-injury opt-outs for the bowl game. So, that's a great sign going into it. And it was really encouraging to see that Zay Frazier announced that he would play in the bowl. I think that was probably the biggest name that we were looking at and kind of questioning, is there a potential that he would opt out?
Yeah, and I think the biggest news from there is the fact that it's a smart move because he's trying to get more tape for, NFL scouts. So really like that from Zay, but, I would have respected whatever decision he made. Real quick, this was graduation weekend for UTSA. One of our longtime listeners, Dan Nerdahl, graduated, so just wanted to give him a shout out, and also give a shout out to anybody else listening who's graduated from UTSA. Congratulations, forever a Roadrunner, right? So hopefully you guys continue to listen. Hopefully you guys stay up with UTSA and we continue supporting.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us on the Hail Married podcast. I'm Atovs.
And I'm Toves.
We'll be back to preview the Myrtle Beach Bowl against Coastal Carolina.
Birds up.